The old Ford Taurus shuddered to a halt on the shoulder of Interstate 80, just past the exit for GA Indiana. The sky was that Article AR shade of depressing gray that only the Midwest can produce in late November, and a cold, damp wind was already finding its way through the cracks in the door. Frank had been quiet for the last 50 miles, which was nothing new. He had learned over the past 42 years of Mame rearage that silence was often the safest option, especially when Linda was in one of her moods. But this time her mood had teeth. "Get out," she said. She did not look at him. Her eyes were fixed on the cracked dashboard, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. "I am done. I am so goddamn done." Frank blinked, his mind slow to catch up. He was 73 years old, and his joints ached from the cold that was seeping into the car. They were on their way back from what was supposed to be a quick visit to see their son, Kevin, in Chicago. A quick visit that had turned into a 4-day ordeal of being ignored, criticized, and treated like an inconvenient piece of furniture. He had spent most of that time sitting in Kevin's basement rec room, watching old westerns on a television with a busted speaker, while Linda, Kevin, and his wife Melissa talked in hushed, pointed tones upstairs. He knew what they were saying. He was not deaf, even if they acted like he was. They were talking about him like he was a problem to be solved. A man his age, with his situation, was a burden. He had heard the word facility float down the stairs once, and a cold dread had settled in his stomach. They were planning to put him away. Their plan was to unload him on the way back, drop him off at some county home, and drive off into the sunset. "Linda, come on," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. It was the voice of a man who had spent 40 years in a machine shop, who had yelled over the row of lathes and presses to be heard. "The car has got a heater. It is 40 degrees out there. Just give me a minute to think." "You have had 60 years to think, Frank," she snapped, finally turning to look at him. Her face was a mask of contempt, the same look he had seen her give the neighbor's dog when it bewayed too loud. "About what?" "About your pathetic little pension. About the money you pissed away on that investment. The boys right. You a dead weight. I cannot keep rying you." He winced. The investment was a small machine shop he had bought in the 80s with a partner, a guy named Silas. It had failed spectacularly when he was in his 50s. It was a sore spot. The one time in his life he had tried to be something more than a cog in the wheel, and it had blown up in his face. He had lost their savings, and Linda had never let him forget it. "I do not have any money on me," he said, patting his pockets as if something might magically appear. He had his wallet, but it contained exactly $14 and an expired Kroger card. His phone was lying in the center console, which was technically his, but he knew better than to ask for it. "Do whatever you want," she said, her voice dripping with finality. She leaned over and pushed the door open. The cold wind blasted into the car, whipping his thin, white hair across his forehead. "I mean it. You ray on your own." He stepped out of the car, his worn-out boots crunching on the gravel. The wind cut through his thin flannel shirt like a knife. He stood there shivering as Linda reached over, grabbed his phone and his jacket from the back seat, and tossed them onto the ground next to him. The phone hit the gravel with a dull thud. "That is yours," she said. "Now get out of my sight." She slammed the door shut, and the Taurus shuddered. For a moment, Frank thought he saw a flicker of something in her eyes, a hint of doubt. But then it was gone, replaced by that same cold, hard look. She revved the engine, a spiteful noise, and pulled away. The taillights disappeared into the gray mist. Frank stood on the side of the interstate, an old man in a thin shirt, clutching a cheap, cracked Smame phone. The wind howled, and the traffic whizzed by. Indifferent to his plight, he was alone. He had $14 to his name, no coat, and a wife who had just discarded him like a piece of trash. He picked up the phone. It was cracked but still working. A notification flashed on the screen. It was from his bank. He squinted at it, his eyes watering in the cold. It was an automated alert. Your account ending in 7894 has received a transfer of $4,300,000 new balance, $4,385,821.47. Frank Stie read at the screen. He blinked, rubbed his eyes, and Stie read again. He had been waiting for this notification for 2 weeks, ever since the final court order from the class action lawsuit against the old chemical plant he had worked at in his youth had gone through. He had been part of a group of retirees fighting for compensation. He never expected it to be this much. His lawyer, a young nervous kid named Meme RK, had said it could be significant. Frank had assumed significant meant maybe enough to fix the roof or buy a used truck, not $4 million. He looked up from the phone. Back in the direction Linda's car had vanished. The old dread was gone. In its place, a cold, hard feeling of liberation settled in his chest. It was a feeling he had not felt in 40 years. It felt like justice. It felt like power. It felt like the first step in a plan he was only just beginning to conceive. Do whatever I want, he muttered to himself, a grim smile spreading across his weathered face. All right, Linda, I will do exactly what I want. He pocketed the phone, zipped up his thin shirt as best he could, and started walking. There was a truck stop about 2 miles back. He had a phone call to make. The walk was brutal, the wind was relentless, cutting through his clothes like they were made of paper. His boots were not made for long walks, and the soles were worn smooth. He slipped on a patch of ice twice, catching himself on the guardrail the second time and scraping his hand. The blood beaded up on his knuckles, but he really felt it. The cold had numbed everything. He just kept putting one foot in front of the other, his mind fixed on the arm. Bright lights of the truck stop he knew was ahead. He thought about his life. He thought about all the years he had spent working double shifts, coming home exhausted, and getting nothing but complaints. He thought about the way Kevin had looked at him over the holidays, like he was an embarrassment. He thought about Linda, and the way she had spoken to him for the past decade, like he was a slow child who needed to be managed. And for the first time, he did not feel angry, he felt free. When he finally pushed through the doors of the big Sky truck stop, the blast of new arm air hit him like a physical force. He stumbled to a booth in the back corner and collapsed onto the cracked vinyl seat. A waitress with tired eyes and a name tag that read Doris came over with a pot of coffee. "You look like you've been through the ringer, honey," she said, pouring him a cup without asking. "You want something to eat?"
Yeah.
Frank said, his voice a raw bowl of chili, and maybe a phone charger if you got one. "I will see what I can do," she said, and shuffled off. He wrapped his hands around the warm coffee cup, letting the heat seep into his numb fingers. He took a sip. It was bitter and burnt, but it was the best thing he had ever tasted. He pulled out his phone again. The notification was still there, glowing like a beacon in the dim light of the diner. $4 million. He still could not quite believe it. He had spent his whole life worrying about money, scraping by, living paycheck to paycheck. And now, just when he had been thrown away like garbage, the universe had handed him a winning lottery ticket. He scrolled through his contacts, his thumb hovering over the names: Mark, his lawyer, a few old buddies from the plant, his son Kevin. He lingered on Kevin's name for a moment, a bitter taste filling his mouth. He could almost hear the condescension in his son's voice, the pity, the really concealed disdain. No, not yet. Kevin had made his bed. He had chosen his mother's side. He had looked at his father, the man who had worked double shifts to put him through college, and seen a liability. It was time for Kevin to see that his father was not a liability at all. He found the name he was looking for, Sully. He had not called Sully in years, not since the business went under. They had lost touch. mostly because Frank was too ashamed to face him. He was the Pyridner, the one who had the brains and the skills. Frank had had the cash, the drive, and the terrible business sense that had sunk the whole ship. He had always felt he owed Sully, not just the money but the apology. He pressed the green button. It rang 3 times, then a gruff voice answered. "Hello, Sully, it is Frank. Frank Henderson." A long pause. "Frank." The voice was a mix of surprise and garroted caution. "The hell, I have not heard from you in God nearly 20 years. What do you want?" "I need a ride," Frank said, cutting to the chase. "I am at a truck stop on Interstate 80, just past. I am in a bit of a spot." Sully laughed, a dry, hacking sound.
Yeah, I will bet.
"You were always in a spot. That is what got us into that mess in the first place. You still chasing get-rich-quick schemes?" "The only scheme I am chasing is getting out of this cold," Frank said, his voice firm. "Look, I am not here to beg, Sully. I am here because I need a friend, a real friend. And I have got a proposition for you. A way to maybe make things right." Sully was quiet for a moment. Frank could picture him in his workshop, surrounded by the tools and machinery he loved, the same ones that were the only thing left from their failed venture. Make things right? How? There was a skeptical edge to his voice, but Frank could hear the curiosity. "I will tell you when you get here. Can you come, please?" "I am at the Big Sky truck stop." Another long pause, then a sigh. "All right, Frank, but this better be good. I am not driving all the way from Toledo just to find out you are still full of hot air. I will be there in about 2 hours." Frank ended the call. His chili arrived, and he ate mechanically, forcing the food down. It was tasteless, but it filled the void. He watched the truckers come and go, their lives a world away from the quiet desperation of his own. For the first time in decades, he did not feel like a discarded old man. He felt like a man with a plan. His plan was not revenge, it was salvation. His own salvation, and maybe, just maybe, some justice. He ordered another cup of coffee and settled in to wait. The minutes crawled by. He watched the clock on the wall, its red numbers blinking steadily. He thought about what he was going to say to Sully. He thought about the machine shop, the one they had lost. He thought about all the men he knew who were like him. Old-timers who had been thrown away by a world that did not value them anymore. And he started to sketch out a plan in his head. A plan that began with a phone call to a real estate agent and ended with the look on Linda's face when she found out she had not left a pauper on the side of the road, but a man with $4 million in his pocket, a new business, and nothing left to lose. When Sully finally walked through the door, Frank stood up. He was a big man, still broad in the shoulders, with a thick head of white hair and a beard that needed trimming. He walked over to Frank's booth and sat down opposite him without a word. "You look like hell, Frank," Sully said, his gaze flicking over the thin shirt, the cracked phone. "Feel like it, too," Frank admitted. "She left me. Linda kicked me out of the car on the side of the road. Told me to do whatever I wanted." Sully raised a bushy eyebrow. The dragon lady finally snapped. "Huh," he shook his head. "What was it this time?" "She catch you looking at the waitress." Frank ignored the jab. "I am getting to my point, Sully. But first, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "You still know your way around a machine shop? You can still weld, fabricate, do the old stuff?" Sully's eyes narrowed. "That is a dumb question. You know I can. I have been doing it for 45 years. It is how I make a living. What is it to you?" "I have a small pension. A few thousand a month," Frank said. "And I just received a settlement, a class action, from the old chemical plant. It is a lot. Enough to buy back the old shop, enough to get us started again." Sully stared at him. The skepticism was melting away, replaced by a desperate hope. "The old shop, the one on Mercer Street, that is a shell, Frank, a rusting shell. It has been empty for years. The equipment is junk. It is a building, Frank said. 4 walls, a roof, and we are not building rockets. We are building simple stuff, arts tools. The stuff nobody makes anymore because it is cheaper to import junk that breaks in a year. There is a market for quality, Sully. I know there is. I can give us the capital. You can give us the skills. We can make it work. The way we should have made it work 30 years ago. Sully was silent for a long time. The diner hummed around them, the clatter of plates and the murmur of conversations a distant backdrop. He ran a weathered hand over his face. Your wife just left you on a highway. You have a bruised ego and a few bucks in your pocket, and you are talking to me about buying a machine shop. He shook his head, but there was a hint of a smile playing at the corner of his mouth. Frank, I think you have finally lost it, maybe, Frank said, a slow smile spreading across his face for the first time. But maybe that is exactly what I need. He stuck out his hand. Sully looked at it for a moment, then took it. The handshake was firm, a promise between old friends. Frank had his Rotner back, he had his plan, and he had $4 million in the bank. For the first time in 42 years, he was exactly where he wanted to be. He was on his own, and it felt incredible. The truck's stop was a beacon of fluorescent light. In the oppressive grayness, a sprawling complex of diesel pumps, a diner, and a convenience store that smelled of stale coffee, burnt fryer oil, and the faint, inescapable whiff of industrial-strength cleaner. Frank shuffled inside, the automatic doors hissing open to welcome him with a blast of warm, dry air. His face was numb, his fingers clumsy. He looked like a ghost, a stray dog that had wandered in from the cold. The cashier, a young woman with a bright pink streak in her hair and a nose ring, gave him a dewy look. He could see the calculation in her eyes, homeless, drunk, or crazy. She had seen all three. Frank ignored her. He found a sticky booth in the back corner, where he could see the whole room, and slumped into it. He ordered a black coffee and a bowl of chili, the cheapest things on the menu. He needed calories, and time to think. While he waited, he pulled out his phone. The notification was still there. $4,300,000. His hands, chapped and trembling, were still having a hard time processing it. He scrolled through his contacts, his thumb hovering over the names. Mark, his lawyer. A few old buddies from the plant. His son Kevin. He lingered on Kevin's name for a moment, a bitter taste filling his mouth. He could almost hear the condescension in his son's voice, the pity, the barely concealed disdain. No, not yet. Kevin had made his bet. He had chosen his mother's side. He had looked at his father, the man who had worked double shifts to put him through college, and seen a liability. It was time for Kevin to see that his father was not a liability at all. He found the name he was looking for. Sully. He had not called Sully in years. Not since the business went under. They had lost touch, mostly because Frank was too ashamed to face him. He was the Rotner, the one who had the brains and the skills. Frank had had the cash, the drive, and the terrible business sense that had sunk the whole ship. He had always felt he owed Sully, not just the money but the apology. He pressed the green button. It rang 3 times, then a gruff voice answered. "Hello, Sully, it is Frank." Frank Henderson. A long pause. "Frank." The voice was a mix of surprise and garroted caution. "The hell, I have not heard from you in, God nearly 20 years. What do you want?" "I need a ride," Frank said, cutting to the chase. "I am at a truck stop on Interstate 80, just past. I am in a bit of a spot." "Spot?" Sully laughed, a dry hacking sound. "Yeah, I will bet. You were always in a spot. That is what got us into that mess in the first place. You still chasing get-rich-quick schemes." "The only scheme I am chasing is getting out of this cold," Frank said, his voice firm. "Look, I am not here to beg, Sully. I am here because I need a friend, a real friend, and I have got a proposition for you. A way to maybe make things right." Sully was quiet for a moment. Frank could picture him in his workshop, surrounded by the tools and machinery he loved, the same ones that were the only thing left from their failed venture. Make things right? How? There was a skeptical edge to his voice, but Frank could AR the curiosity. I will tell you when you get here. Can you come, please? I am at the Big Sky truck stop. Another long pause. Then a sigh. All right, Frank. But this better be good. I am not driving all the way from Toledo just to find out UA Ray still full of hot air. I will be there in about 2 hours. Frank ended the call. His chili arrived and he ate mechanically, forcing the food down. It was tasteless, but it filled the void. He watched the truckers come and go, their lives a world away from the quiet desperation of his own. For the first time in decades, he did not feel like a discarded old man. He felt like a man with a plan. His plan was not revenge, it was salvation, his own salvation, and maybe, just maybe, some justice. He ordered another cup of coffee and settled in to wait. The minutes crawled by. He watched the clock on the wall, its red numbers blinking steadily. He thought about what he was going to say to Sully. He thought about the machine shop, the one they had lost. He thought about all the men he knew who were like him, old-timers who had been thrown away by a world that did not value them anymore. And he started to sketch out a plan in his head, a plan that began with a phone call to a real estate agent and ended with the look on Linda's face when she found out she had not left a pauper on the side of the road, but a man with $4 million in his pocket, a new business and nothing left to lose. When Sully finally walked through the door, Frank stood up. He was a big man, still broad in the shoulders, with a thick head of white hair and a beard that needed trimming. He walked over to Frank's booth and sat down opposite him without a word. "You look like hell, Frank," Sully said, his gaze flicking over the thin shirt, the cracked phone. "Feel like it, too," Frank admitted. "She left me, Linda. Kicked me out of the car on the side of the road. Told me to do whatever I wanted." Sully raised a bushy eyebrow. The dragon lady finally snapped. Oh, he shook his head. "What was it this time? She catch you looking at the waitress?" Frank ignored the jab. "I am getting to my point, Sully. But first, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "You still know your way around a machine shop. You can still weld, fabricate, do the old stuff." Sully's eyes narrowed. "That is a dumb question. You know I can. I have been doing it for 45 years. It is how I make a living. What is it to you?" "I have a small pension, a few thousand a month," Frank said, testing the waters, "and I just received a settlement, a class action, from the old chemical plant. It is a lot, Sully, enough to buy back the old shop, enough to get us rotted again." Sully stared at him. The skepticism was melting away, replaced by a desperate hope. "The old shop, the one on Mercer Street. That is a shell, Frank. A rusting shell. It has been empty for years. The equipment is junk. It is a building," Frank said. "Four walls, a roof. And we are not building rockets. We are building simple stuff, arts tools. The stuff nobody makes anymore, because it is cheaper to import junk that breaks in a year. There is a market for quality, Sully. I know there is. I can give us the capital. You can give us the skills. We can make it work, the way we should have made it work 30 years ago." Sully was silent for a long time. The diner hummed around them, the clatter of plates and the murmur of conversations a distant backdrop. He ran a weathered hand over his face. "Your wife just left you on a highway. You have a bruised ego and a few bucks in your pocket, and you are talking to me about buying a machine shop." He shook his head, but there was a hint of a smile playing at the corner of his mouth. "Frank, I think you have finally lost it." "Maybe," Frank said, a slow smile spreading across his face for the first time. "But maybe that is exactly what I need." He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He opened the banking app and turned the screen toward Sully. The balance was glowing on the display. Sully leaned in, squinting at the numbers. "Jesus," Frank, Sully breathed. Is that real? Real as the cold wind outside, Frank said. It is a class action settlement from the chemical plant. I was PA'd of the original lawsuit. I never thought it would amount to anything. But here we are. Sully sat back in his seat, shaking his head slowly. He let out a low whistle. All these years, you have been living like a broke old man, and you had this coming? I did not know it was coming, Frank said. That is the thing. I found out about the settlement right after she dumped me on the side of the road. I was standing there, freezing my ass off, and I got the notification on my phone. I almost dropped it. So now what? Sully asked. You going to buy a yacht? No, Frank said, his voice firm. I am going to buy that shop, and I am going to build something that matters. Something that proves I am not just some old man waiting to die. I am going to show Linda and Kevin and everyone else who wrote me off that they were wrong, but I cannot do it alone. I need you, Sully. I need your hands, your brain, your skills. I need a PA partner. Sully was quiet for a long moment. He looked at Frank, really looked at him, like he was seeing him for the first time in decades. Then he reached across the table and took Frank's hand in a firm grip. You always were a stubborn son of a bitch, Sully said. All right, Frank, I am in. But we are redoing this my way this time. No more cutting corners. No more cheap materials. We do it right, or we do not do it at all. Frank nodded. That is the deal. We do it right. They shook on it. Two old men in a greasy truck stop diner, making a pact that would change everything. Frank felt a wee earth spread through his chest that had nothing to do with the coffee. For the first time in years, he had a purpose, he had a friend, and he had a plan. He looked out the window at the gray sky, the bleak landscape, the endless highway stretching into the distance. It was the same road Linda had left him on. But now, it looked like the road to a new beginning. He was ready to walk it, one step at a time. Frank and Sully worked fast. Frank's money did not just buy the old shop on Mercer Street, it bought the entire block. For a man with a sudden, unexpected fortune, real estate in a depressed Midwestern town was a cheap thrill. He hired a lawyer, a sharper one than the kid America, to set up a holding company. The company was called Liberty Machine Works, a name Frank had dreamed up in the diner that first night, thinking about the feeling of being free. He took a small apartment in town, a bare bones place with a kitchenette and a single bed, but he felt like a king. His primary goal, however, was not the shop, it was Linda. He knew her patterns. He had lived with them for 42 years. She would be staying with Kevin and Melissa for at least a week, milking the sympathy, telling the story of how she had finally had enough of him. She would be playing the victim, crafting the narrative of the poor, put upon wife who had to abandon her worthless husband. Frank knew she would eventually have to come back to the house. The house was in her name. He had been a fool to sign it over, a compromise after the last big fight. But that house was now a 5-bedroom albatross in a declining neighborhood. A house she could not afford to maintain on her own, not without his pension. That was his opening. He waited 4 days. He did not call her. He did not answer her calls. He just let the silence simmer. He spent those days at the shop with Sully, knocking down walls, clearing out the piles of accumulated junk, and making lists of the equipment they would need. He felt alive for the first time in years. The physical labor, the purpose, the plan, it was better than any therapy. Then, on the 5th day, he made his first move. He called Kevin. Kevin answered on the second ring, his voice a mix of surprise and suspicion. Dade, what do you want? Mom said you were. Well, that you left. She said I left, Frank said, his voice calm and cold. Is that the story she is telling? Well, she said you got out of the car at a truck stop and just walked away. Kevin said, his tone defensive. Look, Dad, we have been really worried about you. You cannot just disappear. Mom is a wreck. A she? Frank asked, a low chuckle escaping his throat. That is interesting, because she also told me to do whatever I want. So that is what I am doing." He paused for effect. "I am coming back to the house, Kevin. Tomorrow I need to get some things, and I need to have a talk with your mother." "I do not think that is a good idea," Kevin said quickly. "She is still very upset. Maybe you should just give her some space." "Space?" Frank's voice roared. "I have been giving her space for 40 hours. Tomorrow I am coming home. I will be there at 10 in the morning. You tell her that, and you tell her it is over. Whatever she is thinking, it is over. I am done being treated like I do not exist." He hung up before Kevin could argue. He could imagine the panic in the household. Linda would be furious, but also he knew, a little skeet, she did not know what he was up to, and that uncertainty was a powerful weapon. The next morning, Frank drove his new-to-him truck, a clean 2015 Silverado, to the old house. He pa right on the street, admiring the crisp morning air, the sun trying to break through the winter clouds. He wore new jeans, a flannel shirt, and a WARM jacket. He looked healthy, rested, and in control. He knocked on the door, not using his key. Linda answered, her face a mask of righteous fury. She was wearing her best robe, the one she wore when she wanted to appear put upon. Behind her in the living room, Kevin and Melissa were hovering, their arms crossed, ready to defend their mother. Linda said, her voice dripping with disdain, "I told you not to come here. This is my house." "It is our house," Frank said, stepping past her into the foyer. She tried to block him, but he was surprisingly solid. "Last time I checked, my name was on the deed."
"It isn't my name,"
she snapped. "You gave it to me." "Gave is a strong word," Frank said, turning to face her. "Let us call it a temporary arrangement." He looked around the living room, taking in the comfortable, slightly shabby furniture, the family photos on the wall. "This is a nice house, Linda. A lot of memories, but it is not a home." "Not anymore? What are you talking about?" she demanded, her voice starting to shake. "You think you can just barge in here and take over? You think you can push me around?" Kevin stepped forward. "Dad, you need to go. You are upsetting Mom. You are not well. You have been acting strange. Maybe you should see a doctor." It was the final straw, the patronizing, condescending tone, his own, acting like he was a senile old man. "I am not the one who is sick, Kevin," Frank said, his voice deadly quiet. "You and your mother, you have been living in a fantasy. You have been planning to put me in a home, have not you? That is what you were talking about in Chicago, was not it?" The facility, Kevin's face went pale.
"Dad?"
"That is, we were just discussing options. For my own good." Frank laughed. Bitter sound. "You wanted to lock me up and take my pension, my health insurance, my freedom, because I am a burden." He shook his head slowly. "Well, I have news for you. That is not going to happen." He pulled a folded piece of paper from his jacket pocket. It was a certified letter from his lawyer. He handed it to Linda. "Here," he said. "This is for you." Linda took it, her hands trembling. She unfolded it, her eyes scanning the legal jargon. Her face went white. What is this?" "It is a petition to remove your name from the deed," Frank said, "on the grounds of spousal abandonment. You left me on the side of the road without a coat or a cell phone, with no money. That is not just leaving, Linda. That is attempted, well, it is not safe. My lawyer thinks we have a strong case, but I am not going to sue you. I do not want you to be homeless. I just want you to know that you are not going to push me around, and you are not going to get my money. The house is going back into my name, and I am selling it. You have 60 days to find a new place to live." Linda read at him, speechless. Kevin looked like he had been punched in the gut. Melissa's face was a mixture of shock and cunning, her eyes calculating. "You cannot do this!" Linda finally shrieked.
"You are crazy! You do not have any money!"
"You cannot afford a lawyer." Frank smiled. It was a calm, confident smile that he knew they had never seen before. "Things change, Linda," he said. "When you left me on that highway, I did not just curl up and die. I decided to do what you told me to do. He walked to the door and opened it. I am doing exactly what I want, and right now, I want you to finally understand what it is like to be treated like you do not matter. He walked out, the door clicking shut behind him. The silence in the house was absolute. He could almost hear the sound of their world crumbling. He got into his truck and sat there for a moment, his hands gripping the steering wheel. His heart was pounding, but he felt a strange sense of peace. He had stood up for himself. He had drawn a line in the sand. And for the first time in his life, he had not backed down. He started the engine and pulled away from the curb. He did not look back. There was nothing left for him on that street. His future was in the shop, in the work, in the new life he was building with Sully. He drove through the familiar streets of his old neighborhood, past the houses he had known for decades, and he felt like a stranger. But it was a good feeling. It was the feeling of starting over. When he got to the shop, Sully was already there, welding a new frame for a workbench. The spars flew in the dim light, casting long shadows on the walls. Frank walked over and stood beside him. "How did it go?" Sully asked, not looking up from his work. "About as well as you would expect," Frank said. "She is furious, Kevin is panicking. They do not know what hit them." Sully stopped welding and raised his visor. "You sure about this, Frank? Once you sell that house, there is no going back." "I have been going back for 40 hours, Frank said. "That is the problem. It is time to go for ARD. Sully nodded and lowered his visor. He picked up his torch and went back to work. Frank watched him for a moment, then walked to the back of the shop, where an old desk sat against the wall. He pulled out a notepad and a pen and started making a list. New equipment, new hires, a skyrocketing plan. He had a lot of work to do. But for the first time in a long time, he was looking forward to it. The phone on his desk buzzed. It was a text message from Kevin. "Dad, please call me. We need to talk about this. You are making a huge mistake." Frank read the message, then deleted it. He put the phone face down on the desk and picked up his pen. He had a business to build, and he was not going to let anything stand in his way. Not Linda, not Kevin, not anyone. He was finally free, and he was going to make the most of it. The next few weeks were a blur of activity. The sale of the house was quick and messy. Linda, furious and humiliated, tried to fight it, but Frank's lawyer had documented the abandonment thoroughly. The truck stop security footage, the text messages she had sent Kevin bragging about finally getting rid of the old man. It was all there. She was forced to accept a settlement that was far less than the house was worth, just to avoid a lengthy, public, and humiliating court battle. Kevin and Melissa, predictably, were furious. They had seen the house as their inheritance, their ticket to a comfortable future. Now, that future was gone. They lashed out at Frank, sending him angry emails, leaving bitter voicemails. Frank ignored them all. He was too busy for petty family drama. He had a business to build. Liberty Machine Works was, against all odds, thriving. Sully had assembled a small crew of semi-retired machinists, men in their late 60s and early 70s, who were sick of sitting at home and bored of their retirement. They were craftsmen, men who took pride in their work. They produced simple but essential parts, custom bushings, high-grade bolts, specialized dies for local construction companies. The quality was undeniable, and word spread fast. They were not competing with Chinese factories. They were offering a service that those factories could not. Personalized, durable, in the USAPR, delivered with a smile and a guarantee. Frank's reputation began to change. He was not just a guy who had been abandoned by his wife. He was the owner of a successful new business. He was a local hero, a symbol of the old-school grit and determination that people in the town longed for. The local paper did a profile on him, headline "Abandoned at 73. He built an empire." Frank cringed at the headline, but he knew the publicity was good for business. One afternoon, Sully came into his small office, a grin on his face. He held a business card. "Got a guy here to see you." Sully said. Says he is with a big outfit out of Indianapolis. Something about a contract. You might want to talk to him. Frank took the CAR. It read Midwest Industrial Supply. John Hanson, Senior Procurement Officer. Frank recognized the name. They were a huge distributor, the kind that serviced major factories and agricultural operations. A contract with them could change everything. John Hanson was a sharp-looking man in his 40s, with a firm handshake and a practiced smile. He walked through the shop, examining the equipment, watching the workers, asking detailed questions about their process and their materials. He seemed impressed, Hanson said. As they settled in Frank's cluttered office, "Your operation is impressive. I have been looking for a domestic supplier for a PA Reticle AR line of high-stress flanges. The quality coming out of our current overseas supplier has been slipping, and we are getting complaints. I am looking for a PA partner who can offer consistency and quality control." Frank listened, his heart pounding. What kind of volume are we talking about? Initial order would be for about 5,000 units, but if the quality is right, we are looking at ongoing contracts for tens of thousands more each quarter. Hanson named a price that was more than Frank had ever dreamed of. Frank nodded slowly, trying to keep his composure. "What can do that?" he said. "But it is going to take some investment in new equipment. We will need to modernize a bit." "That is not a problem," Hanson said, leaning. "What can provide a down payment to secure the contract, to cover the cost of new tooling? We see a long future here." Henderson. They shook hands. Frank felt like he was floating. This was it. This was the big break he had been waiting for his whole life. Meanwhile, word of Frank's success had reached his old family in a different way. Linda was living in a cramped, dingy apartment in a bad part of town. The settlement had given her enough to live on for a couple of years, but she was bleeding money, and her pride was shattered. She called Frank, a desperate tremor in her voice. "Frank, please," she said, her voice wavering. "We need to talk. I made a mistake. I was so stupid. Please, can we just try again?" Frank listened. He could hear the TRs in her voice. For a moment, a sliver of pity cut through his anger. But then he remembered the cold wind on his face, the look of pure contempt in her eyes, the feeling of being utterly discarded. "I am sorry, Linda," he said, his voice flat. "But you made your choice. You said it yourself. I am on my own now." He hung up. It was the final nail in the coffin. He felt a pang of sadness for the life they had once had, but it was a distant ache. He was building a new life now, a better one, with people who respected him and work that made him feel useful. His son, Kevin, was even more desperate. Kevin worked in sales, and it turned out he had been embezzling from his company to pay for his and Melissa's lifestyle, hoping to get his hands on the inheritance from his PA rents to cover his tracks. With that inheritance gone, and the company rotting to close in on him, he was facing criminal charges. He called Frank, begging for money, for help. He was crying, his voice cracking with desperation and fear. "Dade, please," Kevin sobbed. "They are going to send me to prison. I am going to lose everything. You have to help me, please. You are my father." Frank felt a cold stone settle in his gut. He had always wanted to believe that his son was a decent person, just misguided. But this was a betrayal of a different magnitude. Kevin had treated him like a burden, had been planning to lock him away, and now he was begging for a handout to save his own skin. The contempt he felt for his son was almost as deep as the contempt he felt for Linda. "I cannot help you, Kevin," Frank said, his voice heavy with sadness. "You made your own choices. You and your mother. You are reaping what you sowed. I will pray for you, son. But that is all I can do." He hung up. The silence in the office was deafening. He sat there for a long time, stuttering at the wall. The phone calls from his family had been a stark reminder of why he was doing all of this. It was not just about the money. It was about self-respect. He had finally found it, and he was never going to let anyone take it from him again. He walked out of his office and into the shop. The noise of the machinery, the smell of oil and metal, the sight of his men working with purpose and pride, it all washed over him like a wave. He walked over to Sully, who was adjusting a lathe. "Everything okay?" Sully asked, looking up. "Yeah," Frank said. "Everything is fine, better than fine. We got that contract." Sully grinned and clapped him on the shoulder. "I knew it, I told you, Frank. We are going to make this work." Frank nodded. He looked around the shop, at the men who had believed in him, at the machines that were humming with new life. He thought about Linda, alone in her tiny appartement. He thought about Kevin, facing the consequences of his own greed, and he felt a profound sense of peace. He had done what he set out to do. He had built something from nothing. He had proven them all wrong. But the story was not over yet. There were still battles to fight, contracts to fulfill, and a reputation to build. And Frank was just getting started. He rolled up his sleeves and walked over to a workbench. There was a new batch of flanges to inspect, and he was going to inspect every single one. Quality was not just a word to him. It was a promise, and he intended to keep it. 6 months later, Frank stood on the floor of his new, expanded machine shop. The original building on Mercer Street had been gutted and renovated, and they had bought the adjacent lot to build a state of the art addition. The place hummed with the sound of industry, a symphony of precise, powerful machinery. He had a staff of 30 now, mostly older men like himself, but also a few young, eager apprentices who were learning the trade. He was not just building PA Arts, he was building a community. The contract with Midwest Industrial had been a resounding success. The quality of their flanges had exceeded expectations, and they had landed several more contracts with other major companies. Frank was a wealthy man now, but more importantly, he was a respected one. He had become a fixture in the local community, sponsoring the high school's robotics team and donating to the local food bank. He was known as Old Man Henderson, the grumpy-looking guy with the rod of gold who had risen from rock bottom. He still lived in the small appartement, but he had decorated it with things that mattered to him: old blueprints from the shop, a framed picture of his PA rents, and a photo of himself with Sully, laughing at their grand opening PA right. He had a comfortable life. He did not need a big house or fancy cars. He had his work, his purpose, and his freedom. News of Linda had come to him through the grapevine. She had tried to move in with her sister, who lived in Florida, but that had lasted exactly 3 weeks. She had tried to get a job, but at her age, with no meritable skills and a bitter attitude, she could not hold one down. The money from the house settlement was almost gone, and she was living off a meager Social Security check in a trailer park outside of town. Frank heard that she was drinking heavily and had become a shut-in. It was a sad, predictable end, a fate she had created entirely for herself. There was a part of him that felt sorry for her, but the feeling was fleeting. He had wasted too much of his life feeling sorry for people who did not deserve his pity. Kevin's story was even grimmer. He had been convicted of embezzlement and was serving a 5-year sentence in a state prison. His wife, Melissa, had filed for divorce and moved back to her PA rent's house in Ohio, taking their 2 children with her. Kevin was alone, his career destroyed, his family shattered, and his future bleak. He had written to Frank from prison, self-pitying letter full of excuses and blame. Frank had read it, sighed, and thrown it in the trash. He did not respond. Some bridges, once burned, were better left as ashes. One evening, Frank was locking up the shop. He was tired but satisfied. The winter sun was setting, casting long, orange shadows across the parking lot. His old Silverado was sitting there, a comfortable, familiar sight. He was about to get in when his phone buzzed. It was a text message from a number he did not recognize. Mr. Henderson, this is Sarah. I am a reporter for the Tribune. I am writing a feature on the comeback of American manufacturing, and I would love to feature your story. Could I come by for an interview tomorrow? It would be a great piece about resilience and the American spirit. Frank Stie read at the message, a slow smile spreading across his face. He was going to be in the paper again, but this time it was not just a local profile. This was the major city newspaper. He typed his reply.
Sure, Esra.
Come by at 9 in the morning. I will have the coffee on. He put the phone in his pocket and got into the truck. As he pulled out of the PA parking lot, he looked back at the gleaming sign that read Liberty Machine Works. It was his legacy, it was his proof. He had been left for dead on the side of the road, and he had built an empire. The feeling of contentment washed over him. He had found his peace. He had built his own happiness, brick by brick, machine part by machine. He was not just a survivor, he was a victor. And he was going to make sure the whole city knew it. The next morning, Esra arrived promptly at 9. She was a young woman, maybe 30, with sharp eyes and a notepad in her hand. Frank showed her around the shop, introducing her to the workers, explaining the machines, talking about the process. She asked intelligent questions, and Frank found himself enjoying the conversation. "This is remarkable, Henderson," she said, as they settled in his office. "You were abandoned by your wife on the side of the road, with no money and no resources, and within a year, you have built one of the most successful small manufacturing businesses in the state. How did you do it?" Frank leaned back in his chair and thought about it. "I did not do it alone," he said. "I had a partner, a friend named Sully, and I had a lot of help from the men in this shop. They believed in me when no one else did, but mostly I just refused to give up. I had spent my whole life being told I was not good enough, that I was a burden, that I was just an old man waiting to die. And I finally realized that the only person who could change that was me." Esra scribbled in her notepad. "What would you say to other people in your situation? People who feel like they have been written off by their families, by society?" Frank smiled. "I would tell them to look in the mirror and ask themselves what they want, not what their family wants, not what the world expects, but what they truly want. And then I would tell them to go after it, no matter how old they are. It is never too late to start over. It is never too late to build something new. The only thing that can stop you is yourself." Esra nodded, jotting down his words. "Thank you, Henderson. This is going to be a great story." After she left, Frank walked back out into the shop. The men were working, the machines were humming, and the sun was streaming through the windows. He felt a sense of pride that he had never known before. He had done it. He had built something that mattered. And he had done it on his own terms. He walked over to Sully, who was inspecting a finished flange. "How are they looking?" Frank asked. Sully said, holding it up to the light. "Every single one. We are on track to beat our delivery date by a week." Frank clapped him on the shoulder. "Good work, Sully. Good work." Sully grinned. "You know, Frank, when you called me that night, I thought you had finally lost your mind. I figured I would come pick you up, take you to a diner, buy you a meal, and then drive you to a shelter. I never expected this." "Neither did I," Frank admitted. "But sometimes, getting kicked to the curb is the best thing that can happen to you. It forces you to see what you are really made of." Sully nodded. "Well, you showed us all. You showed Linda, Kevin, the whole damn town. You are a tough old bastard, Frank Henderson." Frank laughed. It was a warm, genuine laugh, the kind he had not let out in years. "I am just getting started," he said. "We have got a lot more work to do." He walked back to his office and sat down at his desk. He pulled out a photo from his drawer. It was an old picture of him and Linda from their wedding day. They were young, smiling, full of hope. He looked at it for a long moment, then put it back in the drawer. He was not angry anymore. He was not bitter. He was just at peace. He looked out the window at the street below. People were walking by, going about their lives. He thought about all the years he had spent feeling invisible, feeling worthless. And he thought about how different everything was now. He had a purpose, he had a friend, he had a future, and it was all because one cold November day, his wife had kicked him out of the CAR and told him to do whatever he wanted. He had done exactly that, and it had made all the difference. The phone on his desk buzzed. It was another text message from S.A. Ra. The piece will run next Sunday. I will send you a link. Thank you again for your time. You are an inspiration. Frank smiled and put the phone down. He had a lot to look forward to. The business was growing, his reputation was solid, and he had finally proven to himself and to everyone else that he was not just some old man who had been left behind. He was a man who had built something from nothing, and he was proud of it. He stood up and walked back out onto the shop floor. The noise, the energy, the purpose. This was where he belonged. This was his life now, and he would not trade it for anything. If you have enjoyed this story, please subscribe to my feed for more tales of resilience, redemption, and the American spirit. Leave a comment and let me know what you thought. Your support keeps these stories coming. Thank you for reading.